Good morning, Richard. Well, afternoon now.
Good afternoon, India.
Welcome. Thank you for joining me today for a chat. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you, and my pleasure. Good to be here.
Good. Well, yeah, thank you for booking some time to have this chat. Today, we're going to be discussing boards, not being bored, hopefully, or floorboards, but company boards, which, yeah, is certainly something that I need to get a little bit better understanding on. Do you want to start off by giving me a general overview of what a board is?
Yeah, okay. So a board is a sort of a structure, which is usually just a small number of people whose purpose is there to provide overall governance for the business. If you look at things from a legal perspective, the board is there to meet the interests of the shareholders and other stakeholders, and also provide perspective for a business. But really, it's just a group of people, usually quite a small group of people, who are there, and they sort of help the MD or help the CEO or whatever actually run the business.
Okay, so you don't necessarily have to have one.
No, you don't. For smaller businesses, I guess anything that's not publicly listed, there's no requirement to have a board as such, but it's always considered a very good idea.
A company doesn't necessarily have to have a board, but why would I want one?
The main thing that a board does is add perspective and a bit of discipline and control to a business. So because the board's not normally involved in the day-to-day management of the company, the operations, it's able to sort of take a high-level overview of where the business is going in terms of its strategy and direction, and provides a sounding board, as it were, for the people who are running the business on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so it could be seen, I suppose, as people that you go to for advice.
Yeah, probably more than advice, though, because the directors of a board do actually have a statutory and legal obligation. So they've got rules and requirements they've got to comply with. So ultimately, the board has the final sort of level of accountability for a business.
Okay. Can a board be one person, or are there rules around sort of who you would need to be on it?
Actually, that's a good question. I'm not sure I 100% know the answer to that, but a board of one person wouldn't really be much use. So what some smaller businesses will often do is they'll bring on a non-executive director. So it's someone who's not involved in the day-to-day operations. And I guess between the MD and that director, that would constitute a very small board, but probably wouldn't be especially effective. Because normally, if you've got a board of, 3, 4, 5 people, they would normally bring to the table different skills and competencies. So you get a range of different values that people can bring to the party.
Okay. And sort of maybe a strange question, but how do they get paid, or are they sort of part owners in the company?
All sorts of models there. It's not unusual, particularly in the early stages of a business, for the directors, so they're normally non-executive directors, may not necessarily be taking any form of remuneration at the early stages. Sometimes they could be incentivized by taking a shareholding or perhaps options in the business. Other times they may well be paid. Usually once a business has been going for a few years and the company's starting to trade profitably and so forth, it's likely the board members will expect to receive some form of compensation for the skills they're bringing and everything.
Okay. And who would I want to be on my board, or how do I go about finding key figures to form that board?
So usually you'd be wanting to get a mix of sort of fairly general types of experiences you would want to bring onto the board. And often people look at someone who's got finance experience, and then you could well have people who have a lot of expertise, a lot of experience in the actual sector you're talking about. So if you're in the energy sector, for example, and you're running a business on that side of things, you could well want to bring on one or more people who actually have extensive energy experience.
Okay, but effectively anybody could be on that board. It's just about finding the right sort of structure for your own industry and your own business.
Yeah, and in some cases too, possibly making up any gaps that might exist between the executive, so again, your MD, your CEO, your senior executive, any gaps that they may have in terms of their experience, and making that up for bringing people onto the board. So, for example, your business who's in a certain sector may not have experience in finance, as we touched on before. They may not have experience in marketing or sales and marketing, perhaps, because the people who are running the business are very much experts and focused on the stuff that they really know about bringing that business up and running, but they may not have the wider skills. So that's where you could say, okay, in terms of my board, I'm going to bring on some people that are going to address the gap that we would otherwise have.
Okay, and it sounds like quite a sort of formal setup and process. Are there any downfalls to having one, or should, I guess should is the wrong word to use, but would most companies want to have one?
I think everyone would say it's good practice to have a board in place, and again, it provides extra protection. And as I said before, perspective for other stakeholders and for the shareholders. Ultimately, I guess some people, I've heard some people have said the reason they haven't liked a board is because the board interferes too much in the business. Now, there are two ways to looking at that ordinarily a board shouldn't get involved in the day-to-day side of the business, because your senior management team or senior executive team of the business should bring forward things like what's the strategy, and then over the course of a year, there might be 3 or 4 board meetings, and the business would report to the board on how that strategy is going. But if things are going off target, for instance, they're not meeting their strategic objectives, or they're not meeting their financials, or that sort of thing, it could well be that the board would be saying, okay, what's going on here? What needs to be done to bring this business back on track? Now, because of that, some people would say they don't like the idea of having a board because I'm held accountable to them. But, the answer to that is yes and good.
Yes, and tough.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned one of the ways that people will go about finding specific people for that board is perhaps gaps in, something that the CEO or the MD thinks that it's not their area of expertise. But what if my company is me and only me? Would I still want and warrant to have a board, a full board?
Yeah, probably not. If that's the case, if it's just a one-man band, a company of one, and that's the way it's always going to be, yeah, probably I'd agree that the formal establishment of the board may be a bit overkill at that stage. But I'd still suggest you might want to have a non-executive who would work with you, or a more informal advisor or a mentor, someone that the person who's running that business can actually bounce things off. People do say it's very lonely at the top, and that's very true. Particularly if someone is, they're running their business in a sole capacity. There's no one else they can talk to on an operational basis anyway. But they still need to test themselves, because no one was always making the right decisions strategically or even operationally. So you need somebody to bounce off. Yeah, challenge, exactly.
Yeah, okay. And going back to a question that I had earlier of sort of who forms a board, but more, how do I find these people? Would LinkedIn be a good place to try and approach somebody that might form part of your board?
Yes, by all means. And often it's just a case of asking around to your own contacts in the sector you're operating with. Often people will look more formally at things like the Institute of Management. You can check around those. So, and also the Institute of Directors is an obvious one, where you might be looking for those people. But yeah, no, LinkedIn certainly. Often you'll find the person or the people you find for your board will be someone you may have come across somewhere along the line. You may have seen them in an investor event, or some sort of industry event, or somewhere in your networking activities. But there's absolutely nothing wrong in going to LinkedIn and saying, "Hey guys, I'm looking to put together a small board. Any suggestions?" Absolutely.
And then I guess you can sort of narrow it down based on the gaps that you feel might be missing, and do a little bit more industry specific.
I mean, some boards are very, very large. I've personally sat on one, or as an observer to one with about 30 people on it or something. Now, I'm not advocating going anything like that number. So, a typical board for a smaller early stage business might only have 2 or 3 people, plus the MD of the business. So in total, it might be only 4, might only be 3. But that's still good.
And then in terms of decision making, I guess the way I've always understood a board is that decisions have to be signed off from a board perspective. Is that the correct understanding?
Yes and no. So normally what a board would do is sign off the strategy and the associated financials that might be reviewed, they're put together on an annual basis and might be reviewed every quarter or might be, or every half, something like that. But ordinarily, once that strategy signed off, then it's down to the business and the management of that business to execute on that strategy, and probably only seek approvals or confirmations or something like that if things start going astray. In other words, they're not following the line of the strategy.
So it's not like if in my business I decide, oh, I really need this item or this new person on my team, I must go to the board. It's more of an overarching, this is how the year's looking. What do the board think of that?
Yeah, depending on how formal you can get, sometimes you could eventually get to the point where the board would issue what's called delegated authorities to the MD and to the executive of that business. So that will say, just by way of an example, the MD has the authority to appoint up to 5 staff with a maximum salary cap for the total of 250,000, and no individual should be paid more than 50,000, something like that. Right. So providing the company's operating inside those discretions, then nothing else happens. But if that MD says, actually, it's a really good person here, they're going to cost us £100,000, and that means we're going to go over that 200,000 cap, then I'll need to go to the board to get approval for that decision.
Right, I understand. But it in no way would sort of stop the business owner or founder from making any, day-to-day decisions, or just sort of larger decisions, but just anything that
ordinarily
goes
not
against. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes a lot more sense to me. I don't think I have any further questions, but it'll be interesting to put this out and see if people have anything that they want to get in touch with us on. Do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
Actually, no, I don't think so. I think we pretty well covered most of it there, at least to get things going.
Good. All right then. Well, yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what people think. So as always, get in touch with us with questions and hopefully we will be able to answer. But thank you very much, Richard, for your time, and I'll be speaking to you later.
Okay. Thanks, India.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.